That's okay. Good evening. I just want to read a public notice. The health of the school district students, employees, Board of Education, and the community is paramount. If you choose to attend the meeting in person at the school board meeting room, please note, in addition to other mitigation strategies, face masks are required inside all School District of Holmen facilities. If mitigation protocols, including the correct use of face masks, are not followed, the meeting will recess and continue in a virtual format. The meeting can then be viewed on our YouTube channel. If the meeting convenes virtually, registered participants, public participants will be provided the opportunity and the information to speak virtually. Those without access to the virtual format may submit their comments in writing. So at this time, it's a couple minutes after 7. I would call the school board meeting of December 13th, 2021 to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Anita, if you would do the roll call, please.
Chris Lau.
Here.
Rebecca Reber. Brian Wopat.
Here.
Emily Zapp.
She is excused.
Jennifer Deek.
Here.
Gary Dunlap.
Here.
Cheryl Hancock.
Here.
And I am here.
Okay, with 7 of the 7 school board members present, I would declare a quorum. Approval of the agenda. I would note that the agenda has been posted, distributed, and sent to the local media. With this in mind, are there any changes to the agenda at this time? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda as published.
So moved.
Okay, I am thinking Chris, and then is there a second? Jennifer?
Nope,
Brian.
Just Brian.
Oh, Brian, sorry.
That's okay.
I can second though.
Okay, so a motion's been made and seconded to approve the agenda as published. Any discussion? On the seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. New business, Applied Population Lab. Julie Holman and Sarah Kemp will be presenting for us. Welcome from Madison, Sarah.
So, good evening. Sarah will be presenting, but I just want to introduce Sarah this evening. Sarah Kemp is from the Applied Population Laboratory at the University of Madison, Wisconsin at Madison. We've engaged Sarah several months ago to do a demographic study for the School District of Holmen. It's been many, many years since we engaged APL to do this, and we just wanted to reconcile all the numbers that we work with and forecast with what she's seeing in her profession to provide demographic information. So welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie. Well, thank you for having me this evening. I am going to highlight the report that you were provided and share with you the findings as far as future student enrollment is concerned. So if we look at how we go through the projections process, we look at the background data, which is, the enrollment is very key in this, as well as some other pieces that I'll talk about. Along with, then I will explain the methodology that we use, and then we'll look at the actual projections and how many students you might expect going forward. So what background information do we use? We use the district enrollment. We look to see how the enrollment has been changing historically. In particular, we're very interested in looking at the kindergarten population and whether that's growing or declining. We look at the birth data of the municipalities within the district, and then there's some general population information in there too, general information that isn't part of the projections, but allows you to see, again, whether the municipalities are growing. And then we're going to dive in a little bit more deeper than some districts, because there was a request to look at not only past housing development, we're going to also look at future housing development, and I'll be providing a model that addresses the new development. So first, if we look at the student population over the last 10 years, this is the trend that we've seen. There's been about a 2% increase. So you've been fairly steady as far as your enrollment is concerned. This is 4K to 12. It is seat count, the third Friday enrollment. And if we look at it by grade grouping, we can see there's actually been a decline in the elementary grades, which is that top blue line of 6.5% over this 10-year time period. If we look at the red line, that's the middle school. There's been an increase of 8%. And then if we look at high school, that's where we've seen the most increase at 13.7 in that yellow line. And then there's also the 4K enrollment provided here in this graph. So if we look at kindergarten trend, what I like to do is I like to look at both a 10-year and a 5-year trend. So that red line is showing a 10-year long-term trend that has been declining. But if we look at the last 5 years, the trend is still going downward, but not as much. So the last couple of years, you have seen an increase in kindergarten enrollment. I also like to look at the what we call the kindergarten replacement, which is looking at how many kindergartners are replacing the 12th graders that left the year before. So we see in the last 6 years, you've actually had more 12th graders leave than kindergartners come in, which can indicate some decline in a district. As I mentioned at the beginning, we look at municipal birth data. We use this birth data to project future kindergartners, and we can only get the data by municipal level. And so you'll see this is the last 17 years of births, and it includes the village of Holmen along with the towns of Holland and Onalaska. And then there's just a portion of the city and the other two towns, Farmington and Hamilton, because they're only partially in your district. I made an estimate on those births. If we look at the long-term trend, the decline is a little less, that red line. And if we look at the last 7 years, we see a decline in the number of births in the district. As I mentioned, we have individual, not grade, but age categories of population. This is a population pyramid with the younger people at the bottom, all the way up to the older people in the district, 85 plus. The hollow bars are the 2010 census count. The gray bars are showing the 2019 estimates from the American Community Survey. It's a 5-year estimate, so it's not apples to apples, but it gives you a sense of how the population has changed. And you can see that there's been if you added up the numbers, and there's a table in the report, your numbers as far as school age population is about the same, maybe a slight decline, whereas you've seen quite an increase in the older population. And this is not unusual in many parts of the state of Wisconsin. If we look at new housing new housing from the last 10 years, you do have it by municipality in your report, but this chart is just summarizing the housing type. And we're very interested in looking at the single family, and that has been fairly steady the last 5 years. You've had about 120 new homes. These are new housing starts that have been built in the last 5 years, about 120 a year. You also see the two-family, which is the red line, and then the yellow line represents multifamily. In your report, it does have the city of Onalaska in there. it is all of it's all the housing within the city. It doesn't break it out just for the district. I'm not able to get that data. So if you looked at that table and wondered about that, that's for the entire city. So most students are in single-family homes, sometimes duplexes, but not as many students are usually coming out of multifamily homes or multifamily units. So that's the historical data from the last 10 years. And then part of this project was to also look at future housing. And we only looked out 5 years because it's very hard to really go beyond 5 years. These are all subdivisions that have been approved by these municipalities. There's a list of all of the subdivision names and in the back of the report, but this is just summarizing, that 6A is summarizing the number of the number of homes that will be built out over this next 5-year period. It's an estimate just based on what I collected from the municipalities. And then I looked at how many students might potentially come out of these new homes, and that's what Table 6B provides. I looked at how many students you typically get from homes and estimated then additional students due to new housing development. So this is all the information that's needed to create the projections, and now I'll just explain briefly the methodology that I use. I use a cohort component method, or what we call the grade progression ratio. We look at a 10-year average, a 5-year average, and a 3-year average of these ratios. So we determine the ratios for each grade pair, and then we average them. And the GPRs, the grade progression ratios are the gray boxes are those ratios that are removed out of the baseline. I did remove also a couple of the lower GPR those ratios out of the other two models, which I'll explain a little bit further here. So for example, if we look at the 3rd-year trend, the ratio is 1.012. So we would take the current kindergartners from the 2021 school year, we would multiply it by that ratio to determine the future first graders for next year, and we do this with all the grades. So this is just showing you those ratios in a graphic form. So anything that's above 1 indicates that you're seeing an increase of students from one grade to the next. If it's below 1, you're seeing an out-migration or a smaller number of students that next year in that grade. I handle 4K a little differently in that I kind of separate it out. I do calculate out the birth to 4K as well as the birth to 5K, which you just saw in that previous table. So if we look at the 4K, the 4-year-old kindergarten, on average, you're seeing about 27.5% to 30.5% of the births that occur within the district will attend 4-year-old kindergarten. I use that baseline model for the 10-year grade progression ratio for the baseline model, the 5-year grade progression ratios for the kindergarten and 5-year trend, and then the 3-year ratios for the 3-year trend. And I'll be explaining all of the models in a minute here. Actually, right now. So if we look at what all this means, so we've got 5 different models that are provided in your report. And the first 3 are using the birth information to project future kindergartners. So that baseline model uses that 10-year grade progression ratio for all the grades, and then that long-term birth trend to project kindergartners. The 5-year and the 3-year use the grade progression ratios respectively for 5 and 3 years, and then the recent births are used to project future kindergartners. Now the difference between the first 3 models, again, you're using the birth data. The last 2 models are not using birth data to project future kindergartners. I'm looking at if we just look at how the kindergarten trend has been trending recently, which has been increasing, I use that to project future kindergartners. And then the housing development model is sort of a hybrid model where I've taken that kindergarten trend model numbers, those numbers from that model, and I add those students that you saw, that 6B table, those students are added in addition to your kindergarten trend. So if we look at what these projections will look like, which is what you've all been waiting for, we look at the district total. These are showing you the 5 models in graphic form. You also have the numbers, the actual numbers in your report. You see a decline in enrollment for all 3 of the models that use birth data. The